This is the Acer Aspire 5, and this laptop's got one feature that really sets it apart from others in the price range, and that's a dedicated GPU. Now, Acer makes a whole bunch of different variations of this model, but the one I've got with me today is the Acer Aspire 5 A515-51G. How's that for a mouthful? Now, this model ships with an Intel Core i5-8250U, a 15.6-inch IPS display, 8 GB of RAM, a 256 GB SSD, and an NVIDIA GeForce MX150 with 2 GB of memory. It sells for $899 in Canada, and in the US you can get a similar model with a more powerful i7-8550U processor for $799. There's no aluminum unibody enclosure here, though that's not surprising for the price. It's an entirely plastic construction, but it's really solid and there's very little flex. I'm comfortable picking it up in one hand, though it's a little bit heavy at 2.2 kilograms or 4.85 pounds. There's a good selection of legacy ports here. Along the left side, you've got a gigabit Ethernet connector, a USB-C connector, an HDMI port, a USB 3.0 connector, and an SD card slot. And along the right side, you've got the barrel connector for power, 2 USB 2.0 connectors, and a headphone jack. Though it's got the legacy ports covered, there's no Thunderbolt 3 here, and you can't charge via USB-C. Let's get one thing out of the way. The display on this computer is a bit of a flop. It's got a 15.6-inch screen with a 1920 by 1080 native resolution and a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's got an IPS display, so yes, it has excellent viewing angles, but it doesn't get very bright and the colors look washed out. Now in my model, a lot of backlight bleed was visible in the top right corner when I was viewing it at night or in the dark. On the other hand, the keyboard and the touchpad on this computer are better than average for the price. It's got good key travel, the keys aren't too soft or too firm, there's some wobble when you look closely, but the keys all strike evenly. Now, my model came with an international layout, which is common in Canada, but very annoying, especially the Enter key, but that's not Acer's fault. And I really like how the volume and brightness, which are the most commonly used controls, are close at hand. This keyboard does have a backlight, but the backlight could be better since it only has one level and it turns off after a few seconds of inactivity, which kind of defeats the purpose. The Aspire 5 has a Windows Precision touchpad that does the job well. Tracking is fine, multi-touch gestures work well, but it does register the occasional mistap. It's not a premium touchpad, it's not glass, and it can sound and feel a bit hollow, but it's better than a lot of other Windows touchpads out there. Performance is where things really get interesting. You get a lot of CPU and GPU horsepower for the price. I recorded an average Geekbench score of 14,021 and an average PCMark 10 score of 3,651, which compares very favorably with the much more expensive HP Spectre X360 that I recently reviewed, for example. So the laptop has both an integrated Intel UHD Graphics 620 chip for everyday tasks and a dedicated NVIDIA GeForce MX150 with 2 GB of memory that takes over automatically for more graphically intensive tasks. And the MX150 does a great job. On several tests, it turned in 3DMark scores that were more than 3 times better than the UHD 620. In case you're interested, all of my detailed benchmarks, including my 3DMark results, can be found in the description below. And what about real-world gaming? Well, I think you'll be able to do a good amount of gaming on this laptop at either medium or low settings. For example, Overwatch pushes out 67 frames per second on medium. The more graphically intensive Deus Ex Mankind Divided manages an average of 18 frames per second at medium, which is playable, but you'll probably enjoy it more if you turn things down to low. And Civilization 6, which is a beautiful but slower paced game, clocks about 60 FPS in the early game and dips to around 45 FPS in the mid game. The beauty of the MX150 is that it gives you the option to enjoy many different games without having to spend a lot of money. That being said, if you're a video game enthusiast, this probably isn't going to be enough power. As for storage, the SSD uses a serial ATA interface, which keeps costs down, but is a lot slower than the NVMe interface that they use in more expensive laptops, and the benchmarks show it. I measured an average sequential read speed of 523 megabytes per second and an average sequential write of 452 megabytes per second. Now, this is still an SSD, so those speeds aren't going to have a big impact on most productivity tasks. If you start to push the Aspire, the fans will kick on, and while they're not too loud, they can be a bit distracting at full speed. The bottom of the laptop does get warm under load, but I never found it uncomfortably hot. Battery life was pleasantly surprising. On PCMark 8, it scored 5 hours and 39 minutes, which is 40 minutes longer than the Surface laptop and 25 minutes longer than the HP Spectre X360. Now, keep in mind that that's at 50% brightness, which on this screen might be too dim for some, and these aren't real-world numbers. If you're just doing productivity tasks all day, add a couple hours. And if you're gaming, cut that number down considerably. This is a good time to mention that when I first started using this computer, I had some problems with wake from sleep. It simply wouldn't want to wake up sometimes, and I lost some work as a result of that. And I was going to ding this computer heavily for that, but I updated the BIOS and that seems to have solved the problem completely. The Aspire 5 has 2 speakers which are on the bottom of the laptop, which isn't great placement for speakers on a laptop because they're going to get muffled depending what surface you have it sitting on. The speakers get plenty loud enough, but I hope you didn't show up for bass because there ain't no bass here, son.
This goes against me, it's dumb. I'm thinking he's less smart. It's like, see what I did there? Flows, get your swimwear. Top spot with the dead air, but about the boy we been there. We looking for the way out. Delivery when I take out. No tongue tie when I make out. No acne, bet I'll break out.
So what's the take home here? While this laptop is a great choice if you need a laptop for work or for school, you don't want to spend a lot of money, and you still want to be able to game. It's not a good choice if high FPS or ultra settings are important to you. The most graphically intensive games are entirely unplayable on this computer, but that still leaves you with a great selection of games that perform well enough to keep you busy. As for build and features, again, nothing to complain about. The build, while entirely plastic, is surprisingly solid, and while it's missing some high-end features like Thunderbolt 3 and an NVMe SSD, you're unlikely to notice this in day-to-day use. The real disappointment is the somewhat poor display, which doesn't do the dedicated GPU justice. Still, the Acer Aspire 5 is a solid buy. So what do you think? Is the Aspire 5 really a gaming computer? Do you own the Aspire 5? If so, let me know what you like about it or what you don't. Do you have suggestions for other things I should review on my channel? If so, sound off in the comments and let me know. In the meantime, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.